The courtroom air crackled with a tension thick enough to choke on. The polished mahogany benches, usually filled with the murmurs of legal jargon and shuffling papers, were today a silent audience to a spectacle unfolding at the front. Sheriff Jack Rucker, a man whose presence filled the room like a storm cloud, stood with his hand clamped firmly on the arm of a woman in handcuffs. His face, usually a mask of stern authority, was contorted with a barely concealed sneer. The woman, Sarah, a young, slender figure with eyes that burned like twin embers, met his gaze with a defiant stare that belied her petite frame. Lu ko fai hui hu qua on tada keen on tadaron and bat ka chien bai? The question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable, a silent challenge to the very notion of justice. Jack Rucker, or Ironclad as he was known in the small, tightly knit community of Oakhaven, was a man who wore his authority like a second skin. His reputation preceded him, a tapestry woven with threads of whispered rumors and hushed complaints. He was the law, or so he believed, and his word was gospel. His badge, a gleaming shield of power, was his weapon and his armor, a symbol of his untouchable status. Sarah, on the other hand, was a breath of fresh air in the stale, stagnant atmosphere of Oakhaven. A recent graduate from a prestigious law school, she had returned to her hometown with a burning desire to make a difference, to challenge the status quo, to bring justice to those who had been wronged. She had seen the way Jack operated, the way he bent the rules to suit his own agenda, the way he used his power to intimidate and control. Their paths crossed one sweltering afternoon at the local diner. Sarah, taking a break from her fledgling law practice, witnessed Jack harassing a young waitress, his words laced with thinly veiled threats. The waitress, her face flushed with fear, could only stammer apologies as Jack berated her for a minor mistake. Sarah, unable to stand by and watch, intervened, her voice ringing out with a clarity that silenced the room. Jack turned his attention to her, his eyes narrowing, his lips curling into a sneer. "And who do we have here?" he drawled, his voice dripping with condescension. "Another do-gooder trying to save the world?" Sarah met his gaze unflinchingly. "I'm a lawyer," she said, her voice firm and steady, "and I suggest you leave this young woman alone." The confrontation escalated. Words exchanged like blows, the tension in the diner reaching a fever pitch. Jack, accustomed to having his authority unchallenged, was taken aback by Sarah's defiance. He dismissed her with a wave of his hand, a dismissive gesture that only fueled Sarah's determination. From that moment on, Sarah became a thorn in Jack's side, a constant reminder of the limits of his power. She began to investigate his activities, digging into his past, uncovering a trail of abuse and corruption that stretched back years. She discovered how he had used his position to shield himself from scrutiny, how he had manipulated the system to protect his own interests. The evidence she gathered was damning, a collection of witness testimonies, leaked documents, and incriminating photographs. She knew she had to bring it to light, to expose Jack for the corrupt tyrant he was. But she also knew that doing so would be a dangerous game, one that could have serious consequences. The day of the trial arrived, the courtroom buzzing with anticipation. Jack, confident in his invincibility, sat at the defense table, his eyes scanning the room with a mixture of arrogance and disdain. Sarah, seated at the prosecution table, felt a knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. She knew that the odds were stacked against her, that Jack had powerful allies who would stop at nothing to protect him. The first witness was called, a former police officer who had worked under Jack's command. He testified to Jack's history of abuse, his tendency to use excessive force, his disregard for the law. The courtroom listened in rapt silence, the weight of the accusations hanging heavy in the air. Jack's defense attorney, a slick, silver-tongued lawyer named Richard Maxwell, tried to discredit the witness, painting him as a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. But the witness stood firm, his testimony unwavering. Sarah then presented her evidence, a meticulously organized collection of documents and photographs that painted a damning portrait of Jack's corruption. The courtroom was stunned, the murmurs of disbelief echoing through the room. Jack's face, once a mask of arrogance, now contorted with a mixture of anger and fear. Maxwell, realizing that the case was slipping away, resorted to desperate measures. He attacked Sarah's character, accusing her of being a publicity seeker, a troublemaker, a woman obsessed with taking down a powerful man. But Sarah refused to be intimidated. She met his accusations with a calm, unwavering gaze, her voice ringing out with the force of truth. The tension in the courtroom reached a breaking point. The jury, a diverse group of ordinary citizens, listened intently, their faces etched with the weight of their responsibility. They were the arbiters of justice, the ones who would decide Jack's fate. As the day drew to a close, Sarah stood to deliver her closing argument. She spoke passionately about the importance of justice, about the need to hold those in power accountable, about the courage it took to stand up to corruption. Her words resonated with the jury, their faces reflecting the hope that justice would prevail. Jack, his face flushed with anger, watched Sarah with a mixture of hatred and fear. He knew that his carefully constructed world was crumbling around him, that his badge, once a symbol of power, was now a mark of shame. The question hung in the air, unspoken but palpable. Lu su that ko chien tang duok su tam and hung? The answer, it seemed, was about to be revealed. The air in the courtroom hung thick and heavy, charged with the electric hum of unspoken accusations. Sarah's presentation of evidence had ripped through the carefully constructed facade of Sheriff Jack Rucker, exposing the rot that festered beneath. The silence that followed was deafening, a stark contrast to the earlier murmurs of skepticism and hushed whispers of doubt. Sarah, her voice still echoing in the stunned silence, watched as Jack's composure crumbled. His face, once a mask of arrogant self-assurance, was now a canvas of raw, unadulterated anger. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, flickered with a desperate, animalistic fear. Mang luoi doi tra vasu that duok foi bai. The words resonated in Sarah's mind, a stark reminder of the battle she was fighting. It wasn't just about exposing Jack's corruption. It was about dismantling the entire system that allowed him to thrive, a system built on lies and deceit. Maxwell, Jack's defense attorney, rose to his feet, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and panic. He knew that the evidence presented by Sarah was damning, that it had pierced the heart of their defense. But he wasn't ready to give up. He launched into a tirade, his voice dripping with venom, accusing Sarah of fabricating evidence, of manipulating witnesses, of conducting a personal vendetta against his client. "This is a witch hunt," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the courtroom. A desperate attempt by a disgruntled lawyer to destroy the reputation of an honorable man. Sarah remained unfazed. She had anticipated this attack, had prepared herself for the desperate tactics of a cornered adversary. She rose to her feet, her voice calm and steady, her eyes fixed on the jury. "Mr. Maxwell's accusations are nothing more than smoke and mirrors. she said, her voice ringing out with clarity. They are a desperate attempt to distract you from the truth, to shield Sheriff Rucker from the consequences of his actions. She then proceeded to dismantle Maxwell's arguments, point by point, exposing the flaws in his logic, the inconsistencies in his statements. She presented further evidence, corroborating the testimonies of the witnesses, solidifying the case against Jack. The courtroom watched in rapt attention, their eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Jack, his face now a mask of grim resignation, watched as his world crumbled around him. He had spent years building his empire, cultivating his power, believing himself to be untouchable. But Sarah, with her unwavering determination and her unwavering belief in justice, had exposed him for the fraud he was. The tension in the courtroom was palpable, a tangible force that pressed down on everyone present. The jury, their faces etched with the weight of their responsibility, listened intently, their eyes shifting between Sarah and Jack, between the evidence and the accusations. As the trial progressed, Sarah faced increasing resistance. Witnesses who had initially agreed to testify suddenly recanted their statements, their eyes filled with fear. Documents that had been promised mysteriously disappeared. Sarah knew that Jack's influence extended far beyond the courtroom, that he had allies in high places, people who were willing to protect him at any cost. But Sarah refused to be deterred. She dug deeper, uncovering hidden connections, exposing backroom deals, revealing the intricate web of corruption that Jack had woven around himself. She worked tirelessly, fueled by a burning desire to expose the truth, to bring justice to those who had been wronged. One evening, as Sarah was working late in her office, a knock came at the door. A young woman stood in the doorway, her eyes wide with fear, her hands trembling. She introduced herself as Lisa, a former employee of the Oak Haven Sheriff's Department. Lisa revealed that she had witnessed Jack engaging in illegal activities, that she had been threatened and intimidated into silence. She had been terrified to come forward, but she could no longer live with the guilt of knowing what Jack had done. Lisa's testimony was a bombshell, a game-changer. It provided the missing piece of the puzzle, the final nail in Jack's coffin. Sarah knew that this was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. The next day in court, Lisa took the stand, her voice trembling but her words clear and unwavering. She recounted her experiences, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and determination. The courtroom was stunned, the murmurs of disbelief echoing through the room. Maxwell, realizing that the case was lost, made a desperate attempt to discredit Lisa, accusing her of being a liar, a manipulator. But Lisa stood her ground, her testimony unwavering. The jury, their faces now etched with a mixture of shock and anger, listened intently. They had seen the truth, had witnessed the corruption, had heard the testimony of a woman who had risked everything to expose the truth. Jack, his face now a mask of defeat, watched as his carefully constructed world crumbled around him. He had underestimated Sarah, had believed that his power was absolute. But he had learned, too late, that even the most powerful of men could be brought down by the truth. The question now was not whether Jack was guilty, but what his punishment would be. Lu tsong ly ko duak tuk ti? The answer hung in the air, waiting to be revealed. The verdict hung in the air, a silent judgment that echoed through the hushed courtroom. The foreman of the jury, his voice trembling slightly, pronounced the words that sealed Jack Rucker's fate. Guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery, a mixture of shock, relief, and a somber sense of finality. Su fan zet va su kyu chuok. The phrase resonated in Sarah's mind, a poignant reminder of the journey they had all undertaken. The scales of justice, long tipped in favor of the powerful and corrupt, had finally been balanced. Jack, his face ashen, his eyes hollow, stood as the weight of the verdict crashed down upon him. The illusion of invincibility, the belief that his badge was a shield against accountability, had shattered. He was no longer Sheriff Jack Rucker, the untouchable ruler of Oakhaven. He was just Jack Rucker, a man stripped bare of his power, exposed for the fraud he was. The judge, his voice grave and solemn, handed down the sentence. A lengthy prison term, a stark symbol of the consequences of his actions. The courtroom watched in silence as Jack was led away in handcuffs, his once proud gait now faltering, his head bowed in defeat. The aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions. Oakhaven, a town long held captive by Jack's iron fist, erupted in a mixture of celebration and catharsis. The whispers of fear and resentment that had haunted the streets for years were replaced by a newfound sense of hope and liberation. Sarah, standing amidst the throng of reporters and well-wishers, felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The battle had been hard-fought, the stakes high, but the victory was undeniable. She had exposed the rot that festered in the heart of their community, had given a voice to those who had been silenced, had restored faith in the power of justice. Yet, amidst the celebration, a sense of melancholy lingered. She had seen the darkness that lurked within the human heart, the depths of corruption and the lengths to which power could corrupt. She had witnessed the fear and suffering that Jack had inflicted upon his victims, the lives he had shattered, the trust he had betrayed. She thought of Jack, now confined to a prison cell, his world reduced to four walls and the cold, hard reality of his actions. She wondered if he felt any remorse, if he understood the magnitude of his crimes. She wondered if there was any hope for redemption. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Oakhaven began to heal, to rebuild, to forge a new identity, one built on transparency and accountability. The scars of Jack's reign would remain, but they would serve as a reminder of the importance of vigilance, of the need to protect the vulnerable, of the power of truth. Sarah continued her work, her passion for justice undiminished. She became a beacon of hope for those seeking redress, a symbol of the unwavering pursuit of truth. She knew that the fight against corruption was never ending, that there would always be those who sought to abuse their power, to exploit the weak. One day, a letter arrived at her office, postmarked from the state penitentiary. It was from Jack. He wrote of his remorse, his shame, his newfound understanding of the harm he had caused. He spoke of his desire to atone for his sins, to somehow make amends for the damage he had done. Sarah read the letter with a mixture of skepticism and a flicker of hope. She had seen the darkness that resided within Jack, the depths of his deception. But she also recognized the possibility of change, the potential for redemption. She decided to visit him in prison. The Jack she encountered was a shadow of his former self, his once imposing figure now gaunt, his eyes filled with a weariness that spoke of years of regret. He spoke of his past, of the choices he had made, of the path that had led him to this desolate place. He didn't offer excuses, didn't attempt to minimize his actions. He simply acknowledged his guilt, his responsibility for the pain he had caused. He spoke of his desire to use his remaining years to make amends, to help others avoid the mistakes he had made. Sarah listened, her heart heavy with a mixture of pity and a grudging respect. She didn't know if Jack's transformation was genuine, if his remorse was sincere. but she recognized the possibility of change, the potential for redemption. As she left the prison, she carried with her a sense of both closure and lingering questions. She had witnessed the fall of a powerful man, the shattering of an illusion. She had seen the darkness that lurked within the human heart, but she had also glimpsed the possibility of redemption. The story of Jack Rucker was a cautionary tale, a reminder of the corrupting influence of power, the fragility of justice, the enduring power of truth. But it was also a story of hope, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the possibility of change, the enduring quest for redemption. Lu chung tada hak duak gi tu and hung sai lam kwa kwa ku? The question echoed in Sarah's mind, a constant reminder of the ongoing struggle for justice, the never-ending pursuit of a better world. The end.